Hello, hello. I am Sinner, and I am back with another just off the cuff book review, unedited book review. This time it is The Crowd by Gustave Le Bon. This was a book I wasn't expecting to be as good as it was. Like, it's the full name is The Crowd, A Study of the Popular Mind, and it just covers crowd psychology. Um, I didn't actually think it would be as good as it was. This book blew me away by how interesting it was, and not only how interesting it was, but the end was very, very prophetic. He sort of like predicted very accurately all the problems that would come with democracy, and a lot of the problems he predicted have just straight up happened. Like basically all of them, actually. Like he predicted essentially that due to a parliamentary democracy, the average person would slowly but surely have this accretion put onto him with more regulation, more regulation, more regulation, where the people who, it's not like the government that ends up with the quote unquote true power, but it's more like the the small government, right? The people who um, um, are like the bureaucrats and such, the invisible people who aren't democratic, but they just sort of regulate things. And he saw regulation as something that would inevitably come. And he also saw that what would inevitably happen is people, for the sake of popularity, would promise things that would put more and more strain on the government, like, a lower retirement age or uh, higher paying benefits and these sorts of things. And what would inevitably happen is that the European nations would drive themselves into debt, right? Because you got to keep in mind, a lot of these countries weren't in the debt they are in today, right? That's something that's developed over a long period of time. It's very good book, very good book. It sort of covers basically different types of crowds and how they operate. And the core idea is essentially that the individual is sort of mentally unhampered because of the fact that he is working in isolation. But once someone becomes a member of a crowd, their sort of their higher order thinking and critical thinking skills uh, fade, and they sort of just go a bit more monkey mode, lizard brain type stuff, and then they begin to operate on a lower order of thinking. And um, he uses this to explain why things like, uh, uh, when you have a riot or a protest, people are more likely to get violent, people are more likely to commit crimes, and people are more likely to do very heinous acts when as members of a crowd as opposed to when they're not. Um, because he sees it as like, he also says that they're more prone to violence, crowds in general. And I think a lot of his views on crowds and his negative view on crowds is shaped by the fact that, you know he saw not only the rise of democracy in France, but the what makes France's history different from America is when America rose as a democracy um, after the revolution, it it was still a slavist society and all, but it didn't devolve into a dictatorship. Whereas in France, it did, and and the revolution evolved into like the terror that happened after the revolution, where everyone's heads were getting chopped off, everyone was getting killed, Robespierre and all that sort of jazz. And I think I'm guessing that has influenced him quite strongly, because he almost sees it as like a he's not very fond of crowds, basically. He's not very fond of people organizing en masse. Um, what else is there to say about this book? It's a very short book. It's only 100 pages, so it's actually a very easy read. He also talks about um, with the way crowds work, which I thought was interesting, is that he touches on a lot of things here in this book, but he talks about with crowds and their psychology. With politics, it's actually sort of because people are thinking with their more um, basic mindset, they can't really handle contradiction. So you can't really go about using reason or contradicting a crowd. You can't go to a crowd and tell everyone, hey guys, you're wrong. X, Y, and Z is why you're wrong. If you break this down and you see this contradiction, that's going to explain everything. What's really going to happen with a crowd is they're just going to get angry at you if you do that. And he gave this really interesting example from when the Bastille was being stormed. And there was this man who was absolutely innocent, but the crowd wanted him dead. And a skilled orator, came out and he said, excuse me, he said basically, Gustave Le Bon at this time was younger, and he assumed that the orator would use reason and be like, guys, he's innocent. No, the orator said he is guilty, and justice will be swift. We will take care of this man, but leave him to me, and we will handle it. And then the crowd dispersed, right? So that would be an example. You have to like trick the crowd. You have to play on their emotions. You have to do this sort of thing. You can't use logic, or you can't try and use skillful argument, facts, these sorts of things. It's not going to work, basically. He also does mention politics at the end in this section on electoral crowds. And there's this really lovely quote, which I just like. I was like, this is a truth nuke, basically. I'm going to read this out to you now. Quote, the possession of prestige does not suffice, however, to assure the success of a candidate. The elector stickles, in particular, for the flattery of his greed and vanity. He must be overwhelmed with the most extravagant blandishments. There must be no hesitation in making him the most fantastic promises. If he is a working man, it is impossible to go too far in insulting and stigmatizing the employers of labor. As for the rival candidate, an effort must be made to destroy his chance by establishing, by dint of affirmation, repetition, and contagion, that he is an arrant scoundrel, and that it is a matter of common knowledge that he has been guilty of several crimes. It is, of course, useless to trouble about any semblance of proof. Should the adversary be ill acquainted with the psychology of crowds, he will try to justify himself by arguments instead of confining himself to replying to one set of affirmations by another. He will have no chance whatever of being successful. And he will have no chance whatever of being successful. Super truth nuke. It is so common for the way, like, when you're young, you think like, oh wow, this lie was spread about this particular political candidate or this person. Same thing with canceling, right? This lie was spread. Oh man, I think I'm going to do is just try and dispel these accusations. Everyone knows that there's no point, right? You either have to you either have to just lob accusations back or just ignore it completely. If you address it, it just makes you look guilty in the eyes of a crowd. There's no point in it. Everyone knows this. It's very true. And that's another thing. The whole point which he talks about um, with the contagion. He talks about ideas spreading within crowds, affirmation, repetition, and contagion. So basically, this is something that advertisers do a lot, and this is something that has been popular presumably since the late 1800s, which is that if you want someone to believe something en masse, like as a crowd, the easiest way to do it isn't actually to form a well structured argument and to break down those sorts of things. It's actually just to constantly positively affirm an idea over and over and over again until it becomes um, uh, uh, not basic knowledge, but like it becomes self evident, not questioned. You know, you see this a lot of the time with politics, right? People are always spreading what I would say are mantras, right? You know, blank rights are human rights, or like, you know, um, this speech is hate speech. That's a hate, or this speech is hate speech. Basic, like, if you just have a mantra, make America great again, make America great again, you know, then people are going to go, Trump's going to make America great again. It just becomes second nature. So, like, pushing mantras on the public has been a thing since the 1800s, which is crazy. And the way to do it isn't to, again, critically make people think, it's just to lob it at their head until it sticks. And it works. That's the crazy thing. It absolutely works. Otherwise, advertising campaigns wouldn't do it, you know? So many advertising campaigns, they're not telling you about how cost effective um, KFC is, right? KFC isn't going to go around saying, "Hey man, this is a cost effective, quick, cheap, yummy meal. You should buy some KFC tonight." Nah, what do they say? Finger licking good. Finger licking good. Finger licking good, or whatever, right? You just memorize it and then it's in your head. So yeah, I think this is a really good book. The very last section of the book, where he basically more or less prophesies the problems that I see in our society today are it's it's insane to me. You know, I think this is probably a must read in my opinion, and I'm definitely going to start reading more stuff on crowd psychology by Gustave Le Bon. I think he's onto something, man. I think he's really onto something. But I've I think I've gone on for too long. I'll try and look for a quote real quick at the very end here because it like it blew me away. Oh, and at the end he talks about like sort of the course of a race, as in like a nation of people. And he says basically that at first they're sort of an amalgamation of people who are ruled by a chief, essentially, some sort of pseudo tyrannical guy. And then they eventually amalgamate and become a nation with shared ideals and values and a shared core and history. And then that eventually turns into um, a great civilization. And then that civilization inevitably loses sight of what it was and what made it good. And it will have the appearance of being still a good nation because it will still have the spoils and the infrastructure and the institutions that made it great. But because it's died in its core, it's inevitable that it's going to downfall, essentially. It's going to rot away into the wastes. And out of it, eventually, a new nation will form. But first, there's going to be an era of barbarism, which I think we're getting, you know, I hate that like good times make like strong men make good times make weak men meme, but like the way it's written here is a lot better. And but it's essentially the same meme. And yeah, we're living in the end times, man. We're living in the end of an era. 100% we're living in the end of an era. It's it's crazy. Hmm. Here, let me leave you with a quote, and then I will stop talking. Legislation, since this period has followed the course I pointed out, rapidly multiplying dictatorial measures have continually tended to restrict individual liberties, and this in two ways. Regulations have been established every year in greater number, imposing a constraint on the citizen in matters in which his acts were formerly completely free, and forcing him to accomplish acts which he was formerly at liberty to accomplish or not to accomplish at will. At the same time, heavier and heavier public, especially local burdens, have still further restricted his liberty by diminishing the portion of his profits he can spend as he chooses, and by augmenting the portion which is taken from him to be spent according to the good pleasure of the public authorities. Truth nuke. That's all I'm going to say for now. I am Sinner. Thank you for listening. I'll see you soon.